existence. The spiritual world starts from what we call the 99% world. Has everybody got this? Okay. Starts from what we call the 99% world, which is very similar to what Kabbalah teaches about there being a very evolved or much higher form of reality beyond our physical world from which all the other dimensions sort of derive. Our dimension is way down here, close to the 1% world, which is also something called null space, which is devoid of reality as we know it. It's a better way to look at that. It's not on this slide, though. Each of these dimensions, as you go down from the Godhead, or what we call the Creator, sort of devolves in complexity. So by the time you get to the fourth or the third dimension, reality is not quite as complex. Beings become subject to something we call death. So as we were talking about earlier, Christology is the science that we're talking about. It's a very ancient science that was propagated primarily by ancient Gnostics, primarily from the Essenes. Can I erase this now? Has everybody heard of the Essenes? The Essenes were a very, for lack of a better word, they were a very interesting group. And that's putting it very mildly. There are stories among the older ancient Essene cultures that they had a secret technique called the paradosis. Has anybody heard of that before? Okay. So the paradosis was a technique that involved taking in sunlight, among other things. And through the paradosis, one was able to transform themselves from a mortal being into an immortal being made of something other than physical matter. The paradosis was something that was only passed to the elder elect members of the Essenes, never to the women, which is sort of unusual, because if you're going to be immortal, why not have women around? But that's just me. So let's go over what these universal forces are. The paradosis takes into account one of these particular forces. In particular, takes into account the B factor, which we'll go over in a few minutes. These universal forces we're going to talk about, and I'm leaving one out on purpose. The A factor we're going to go over, the B factor we'll go over, X, Y, and Z factors. I'm leaving out the H factor because that's a factor that has to do with causing someone intentional harm. You can take advantage of that and learn about that when you're being trained in sort of the dark arts, but I don't train people or talk to people about that in particular. So let's talk about the factors one at a time. How are we doing on time? 20 minutes? Okay. The first factor, and I'm going over this a lot faster than I normally do, because we're condensing 2 days down into 3 hours. The first factor that we're going to talk about is called the A factor. And the A factor causes the propagation of self-propagation by which God is separated from himself and he disseminates himself throughout the universe. It's the first force that is taught in this science that is created. It's the first universal force that we have identified or that has been identified by the ancients. It's the first cause of emergence. One of my teachers was a Kabbalist, a very old Kabbalist, and I wondered just how old this guy was. But he told me a story about how the first force came into being, and I kind of like the story because it condenses it into something I could understand easily. He said, what if you knew a man who was extremely wealthy, and this man came to your home every day and said, I want to take you out to dinner and buy you things. And that might be cool the first time or two. And the next day this man calls and said, I want to take you out to dinner and show you the town. After 3 or 4 times of doing that, most of us would start to get a little bit uncomfortable that this person was doing everything for us.